välkomna till detta veckomagasinet special. Vi befinner oss här i Nobelmuseets källare med årets mottagare av Ekonomipriset. Professor Jean Tirole, som redan innan han fick det här priset var världsberömd för sin forskning om hur staten kan och bör reglera marknader och industrier. Welcome to Stockholm, Mr. Tirole, and thank you for your time. You've been studying and theorizing regulation and markets and how to regulate industry since the 70s. How would you say that how we view regulation and the role between the state and markets in this respect has changed since then?
Well, the role of the state has changed quite a lot. I mean, the old time, the state used to be a producer with state-owned enterprises, and most of them actually were not that efficient. I mean, some were actually, but most of them were not efficient. They were producing with very high costs and not very innovative. Now things have changed. We think more of the state as being some kind of referee in a game between firms. So we try to have the state intervene in industry so as to have better outcomes, so competition could occur. And there are various branches of that. One of them is antitrust, and the antitrust is about basically making sure that large firms do not abuse their market power, and also check on mergers and co-marketing arrangements. And then there is regulation of network industries, those which have very large fixed costs or network externalities, so that in the end you could have at least some more efficiency. So we try to promote more powerful incentives so that they will reduce their cost, but also have some competition introduced so the competitors could have access to the bottlenecks, the essential facilities like the power grid or the local loop for a telecom company.
And a key feature of your work is that, as I understand it, that one size doesn't fit all.
That's correct. All industries are different, so you don't regulate the payment card industry or Google or the cement industry or whatever industry in the same way because they have their specificities. So what industrial organization economists have done is really to think through the various models, and they have been very patiently building a corpus of knowledge that will help the antitrust authorities and the regulators, because it's just difficult and things are moving very fast. So we have to anticipate the new evolutions. The payment card industries I was just citing, for example, in the old days that was Visa and MasterCard, but now you have Google wallets and you have various other means of payments that are being developed, and things are going, Bitcoin, things are going to change.
And these are global as well, while most of regulation power is still on a national level.
That's right, and that's actually a big issue because you lack sometimes to have worldwide regulation, and for banking is a case in point. But
do you want worldwide regulation for banking?
Yeah, well, it's difficult, but I think in Europe, at least in the Eurozone, we have made a lot of progress with the banking union, and there are several reasons for that. One is, of course, that you have more expertise, in Frankfurt than just in 17 or 27 countries for all of Europe. You get better talent, and that's very important because the banks have very sophisticated people, and the regulators have a difficulty. There is an asymmetry of information. It's very important actually to keep up. But also there are lots of externalities. So, I think the banking union might have been able, for example, to prevent the crisis in Spain.
In what way?
Well, it's very interesting what happened in Spain, because actually Spain has very good bank regulator. You will not believe it. The Bank of Spain actually warned about the crisis a long time in advance. So actually they were very good at. But then the politicians, both in Madrid and in the regions, actually, favored lending to, real estate lending because they wanted to have people access property, and actually they created the real estate bubble. And the Bank of Spain actually said, no, you should not be doing that, but they were not heard. Now, if it had been in Frankfurt, and Frankfurt had been able to downsize the bank and ask them for more capital because they were taking a lot of risk, that may not have happened.
So you think the banking union is the way forward?
Yeah, I think so.
So your book on banking regulation from 1994, you focused on capital requirements. Were you right?
Well, capital requirements, as we know, are very important. At the time, we didn't anticipate liquidity requirements so much. I mean, that's something I've worked later on with Bank Tormström and then Emmanuel Fary in the late 90s and later on. So we were in the book with Matthias de Waardripon, we were very much focused on capital requirement, and that was the important thing, of course. And then now we need to have more focus on liquidity requirements. But in a sense, all those risks we tried to identify at the time, perhaps in too theoretical a way, but we were concerned that there would be some problems with the banks. At the time, there was not much echo from that. People didn't catch up so much with the banking regulation. It was not really a field. People who are microeconomists, they were not so much interested in banking regulation. And the macroeconomists, they were not working so much with the financial sector either. So it was kind of in the middle of nowhere.
Yes, and then of course the financial crisis showed us just how connected the real economy and finance are. You mentioned asymmetrical information, which I would guess is a massive issue when it comes to financial regulation, that the politicians or the regulators, it's very hard for them to keep up or know exactly what's going on within finance. How can one deal with that problem?
Well, there are several ways of dealing with asymmetric information. One is to try to make sure that the regulators understand better what's going on. Let me give you an example. Some economists have basically said that over-the-counter markets, OTC markets, which are bilateral arrangements, are great, and because they complete the market, they are better forms of insurance. And that's correct, except that those contracts are incredibly complicated and are understood by only a couple of people in the world. And for regulators, it was very difficult to understand what was going on. So if you take AIG, for example, the reason why AIG was rescued is that nobody understood what the consequences will be if you didn't rescue AIG, because there will be spillover effects, contagion on other banks and insurance companies. Now, if you use centralized exchanges, it's much easier for a regulator to understand what's going on, because there are prices, there are margin calls, so it's safer somehow. Now, I'm not saying OTC markets are bad. So if some institutions or Warren Buffett play with their own money on OTC markets, that's perfectly fine. But if banks play with OTC market without the regulators understanding what's going on, that's bad. So that's one of the ways. Centralized exchanges are one of the ways of reducing the asymmetry of information.
But it can, of course, never be reduced perfectly.
No. And that's why you also need capital requirements and liquidity requirements, so as to have a cushion to protect the depositors and ultimately the taxpayer against losses.
What about this other problem that showed up, in around the financial crisis of 2008, when many regulators were, like on Iceland, close friends with the people they were set to regulate, or wanted, to go and work in banking one day themselves? How do we sort of account for those kind of mechanisms in our models or in how we think about policy making?
Well, I've worked also on the issue of capture, but it's a very difficult issue because often the competent people are people who also have a link with industry. So if you want to have the best regulators, you sometimes have to take the people who have actually conflicts of interest because they've worked for the industry themselves. So we have to be very careful about that. We have to have rules about the revolving door. And sometimes, coming back to the banking union, having people in Frankfurt, for example, to regulate Spanish banks, you will have teams which will have Spanish people who will be competent about Spain, mixed with people from Frankfurt, which probably will be a little bit more independent. And then in the end, the decisions will be taken in Frankfurt, which probably is a good thing, because you need to have arm's length, otherwise it's kind of difficult.
Are firms rational?
Firms are rational to some extent, yeah. I mean, I've worked on behavioral economics. We know all the cognitive and various other biases that occur for managers, just like for anybody else. But they are somewhat rational, I think. When people say, people were completely irrational during the banking crisis and also the euro crisis, I'm not quite sure, because sometimes they were just gambling with taxpayer money. And, they were sometimes it was because of ego concerns, like Lehman Brothers. You know, you wanted to be as big as Goldman Sachs, for example. Ego concerns play a role, but also sometimes, you know, they're trying to take risks because they want a bigger profit. And in the end, it's up to regulators to give the right incentives.
How can game theory help us with regulating?
Well, game theory basically describes the situation. You're forced to describe the situation and explain what you think is going on, and then you try to see what kind of game they are playing and the strategies they are going to use. So you have to include, you know, asymmetric information, of course, because that's a very important part of those games. Capture, yes,
yeah.
yes. So I wrote an article in the 80s actually about trying to understand organizations in which you have capture. Actually, that was based on asymmetric information, which is very often the capture comes because, you know, the upper tier, you know, what we call in jargon the principal, you know, like the voters or the politicians, they may not have all the information because those who are supposed to monitor actually collude with the monitorees. And, you know, that was a framework that we built and other people built after that on, you know, how to think about capture. The capture was a manipulation of information, basically.
So we talked about regulation, so let's talk a little bit about deregulation. I think it was Poland's former president Lech Wałęsa who said that to make a capitalist economy communist is like making fish soup out of an aquarium. It's the other way around. That's difficult. What can we learn from, you know, the rather big scale experiments of deregulation in Eastern Europe after the Iron Curtain, and which, you know, still has an effect on, you know, very much on European politics and economics?
Well, I mean, basically, capitalism is not about laissez-faire. I mean, we have to understand that. Capitalism needs competition, and competition needs a regulator.
So the states need to uphold competition.
State, that's right. You need a strong state in order to have correct competition. So capitalism is about accountability. I would say that much more generally. I mean, think about the environment, for example. You know, some people think that capitalism is about laissez-faire in the environment, but not at all. I mean, economists have been saying for a long, long time that everything should have a price, including the environment, so that basically you cannot just pollute for free. And that's very important. That's the way actually, I think economists have been among the first ecologists in a sense. They've been green, but in a specific way. They say, here's what works and what doesn't work. So you need regulators, you have market power.
So you cannot deregulate in order to reach laissez-faire because it doesn't exist.
No, that's right. You need to let a firm decide what they want to do. I mean, you cannot micromanage the firms. That's inefficient. You let the firm do whatever they want to do, but you give them the framework so that they are not going to abuse their market power, they're not going to use the taxpayer money or put on taxpayer money, or they're not going to abuse the environment. You have to give them the framework so that they have the incentive to do the right thing.
So the relationship between economics and politics is a complicated one, to say the least. So you've done, you know, decades of work on this. What do you think, you know, of something that is, you know, of very big interest to politicians and politics, and what do you think the right kind of relationship between the science of economics and politics should be?
Well, I've always tried.
Should they listen to you?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, you know, I've been trying, for example, in France for quite a number of years to encourage a labor market reform, because right now we have a very dual system with people who have a protected job are still nervous because if they lose their job, they won't find another one. And then basically another group of people, especially young people who don't find a job, they get sometimes subsidized jobs, which are not very good jobs. They are unemployed most of the time. And we sacrifice, you know, all those young people because we have a bad labor market system, which also is very costly to society. So the unemployment insurance and all kinds of training programs which actually are not functioning very well. So I'm trying to change that in France, and it's very hard to be listened to. But at some point, you know, we cannot go on with a lot of unemployment, which is both real and, you know, official and disguised as well. There's a lot of disguised unemployment in France. So I try to push for that, but it's very hard because the politicians, and I've written on that with my advisor, Eric Maskin, who got the Nobel Prize 7 years ago. It's very hard because they're under the pressure of public opinion, and the public opinion, that's fine for social concern and social decisions, but for technical decisions, the public opinion, unfortunately, is not always very well informed. Whereas I think my work and the economist's work in general has had more impact on independent agencies, so like antitrust or central banking or regulation, because those are independent agencies. Politicians are more under the pressure of public opinion, which is a good thing too, but of course for very technical decisions may actually not be always very good.
It's a different logic.
It's a different logic, yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Tirole.
Thank you very much.